Hi, folks. Welcome back to the second of a double feature of Voices of Resilience this week. My name is Eric Mucky. I'm the CEO and Executive Director of Lost&Found. Lost&Found is a Sioux Falls-based 501c3 nonprofit that facilitates comprehensive suicide prevention programs for young adults 15 to 34. And Voices of Resilience is a place each week where we come together to talk about the ways that people are providing resilience to others and for their communities, and also sharing some tips with us about how we can find resilience for ourselves. Really appreciate you joining us for the second of a double feature this week. A little bit of some scheduling changes on our end, but this month, the month of May, is Mental Health Month in the United States. So this month, Lost&Found is really going kind of back to its bread and butter and talking about the core of what we do, which is mental health. But we're taking a bit of a different tack this month and talking about perspectives on mental health that you might have thought about, you might have asked questions about, but may not always hear about day to day. And on Tuesday, we were blessed to join with Chef Nicholas Skyeski here in Sioux Falls, who is talking about men's mental health and sort of the ways in which we as men can better serve ourselves by seeking out help and admitting when we need support. And today I'm really excited to have Yamini Reddy join us here, University of South Dakota alum based in Bengaluru, India. Thankfully, she's been able to join us despite the time zone differences today. So we'll jump into her perspectives here on global mental health here shortly. But first, as always, I want to give a shout out briefly to our sponsors, American Bank and Trust and the A Strip Family Foundation. The A Strip Family Foundation, based in Rochester, Minnesota. Their values are faith, family, and healthcare. A longtime supporter of Lost&Found and this specific program, Voices of Resilience. Learn more, you can go to astripfamilyfoundation.org. And our other sponsor for today, American Bank and Trust, also a longtime sponsor of Lost&Found. You can find them in Sioux Falls and around the state of South Dakota. To learn more about their services, go to abt.bank. Thanks to both of our sponsors for supporting resilience in our community. So today we're taking a bit of a different tack than we did on Tuesday and going all the way around the world, it seems like. Really happy to bring in my friend and former classmate from the University of South Dakota, Yamini Reddy. Yamini Reddy is an athlete turned public relations professional who recently launched her own PR firm. We'll shout that out here on the show. Based out of Bengaluru, India, she's also the recipient of a few prestigious industry awards, such as India's Best Public Relations Professional under the age of 30 by PR Moments in 2018. And more recently, she was recognized as a Young Turk by Reputation Today in 2020. Known for bringing a lot of her sports skills into her leadership style, she excels at building strong teams, delivering strategic value to clients at the boardroom level. She's an alumna of the University of South Dakota, specifically the tennis team. Yamini can be found playing tennis in Bengaluru, India, reading a book or exploring a new city in her free time. And fortunately for us, joining us on Voices of Resilience to talk about global mental health. Thanks for joining us today, Yamini.
Thanks, Eric. That was a great introduction. I don't think I could have done it better myself.
Happy to have you. And I know there's more that I could say specifically about your tennis skills. Many of our friends at USC can talk about. But every week when we come here, what we really start with is sort of the hats that we wear. And I know you wear plenty of them. So can you share a little bit more about the hats that you wear in your day-to-day life?
Yeah, I think to begin with, it's really being a daughter. I think that's the most important. A sister, a daughter, a friend, a family member. But of late now, it's become, a peer, a mentor, and sometimes it's just a ear and a shoulder to just lean on, more than anything else. Sometimes it's boss. Of late now with the new business, it's, HR, IT, different roles as well. But yeah, I think family for me and friends are the two that I hold closest, because I think they've been my biggest support system through my entire life.
Well, and I have to say, I know the one hat that you didn't mention is world traveler. I think one thing to share here is you've now lived essentially halfway across the world in both India and the United States. And one of the things we're really kind of going to dive in here today a little bit is the perspective you have of mental health, having lived in both countries. And right now you're based in India. Tell us a little bit about your background. Obviously, India is home to you. Tell us a little bit of the journey, so to speak, to the United States and then back to India.
Sure. So essentially my journey, well, I grew up in a very different household. I think for most Indians, it would be seen as very different, right? We were a very sports-led family. My parents always believed that, athletics could pave the way of a different life, right? Not that education is not important, it is, but they really wanted us to get different exposure as well. And my dad, having played professional tennis, they said, the two of you play a sport because it will teach you a lot of things that, potentially books cannot, in terms of exposure, in terms of just being able to think on your feet. So we did play professional tennis, and part of that, I was actually homeschooled for my 10th grade and my 12th grade because we would travel around almost 3 weeks out of the month playing at different locations across India and globally as well. So I finished my 12th grade, and then it was a choice that I had to make to say, okay, do I want to pursue just my education, which is what you can do here in India, or do a mixture of both where there's athletics and there's education in the US. So I was really fortunate to get a 100% athletic scholarship to the University of South Dakota. At the time, most people thought I was a little out of my mind because, nobody really hears about South Dakota. When you come from India, you go to New York, Texas, California, not really South Dakota. Midwest isn't a popular place, let's just say the least. Decided to take a leap of faith and say, okay, it doesn't matter. Let me go there. Honestly, looking back, best decision I ever made, right? In terms of a community, in terms of the opportunities that are there in the Midwest. I loved every part of it. I think the first year, if you had asked me, I would have been like, okay, this is a very, very different world, right? It was almost a reverse shock, culture shock, right? Coming from a city where there's so many people, you have public transportation, you have everything at the tip of your finger, right? In terms of services, in terms of access to things, and to go to a town where you kind of walk everywhere. Everyone says hello. They're super polite. The doors are unlocked, right? So it can be a little scary, but I think it grows on you just because of that sense of community. Coming from, not knowing anybody, not having any family close by, I think that was so, so important and really made a huge difference in the way I viewed, my life in itself and how I felt, you should treat people and how the world should be in a way. So that's what led me to the US and South Dakota. Yes, I did play tennis all 4 years, which was great. I ended up working at a small PR firm called Tallgrass PR after I graduated. I was fortunate to get a job there. So I did that for a year. And then it was time to pack my bags and head back over to Bangalore, my hometown. I wasn't too sure when I first came here and kind of started, and 5 years, 6 years in, and I said, okay, it's going great. So quite happy, and I've just launched something of my own, which is exciting. So it's a new journey.
Plenty of journey in between, I would say, too. So thinking of sort of where you're at now, tell us a little bit more about the PR firm you just launched.
Sure. So I'd worked at a company called The Practice for 5 years. It was a great opportunity. I think just the amount of growth that I saw, the amount of respect, the kind of clients that I got to work with, right, were just amazing, right? Some of the leading brands in technology, and these are global companies. So that exposure and that trust, really helped me grow as an individual and really helped me learn a lot more of what was possible within the field of public relations. Taking from that, I think I'm always been passionate about being at like the forefront of that change. I know even in college when I was sitting, I was like, I never wanted to sit on the sidelines of the table. I wanted to sit at the table, right? And if I usually set my mind to something, I said, okay, I want to be there and I'm going to work towards it. So always having that. And I think it comes from that sports upbringing where you have to anticipate the next move, right? You have to think 2-3 shots ahead. And so you constantly are working towards something more and progressing. So you're not just standing still. So if you ask me about a year ago, if I saw myself starting something so soon, I probably would have said no. It was definitely a plan 4 or 5 years down the road. I think with everything that's happening in the world right now, I think sometimes opportunities come knocking. Sometimes you need a change. And I decided, okay, if I want to change the way I work and I want this to be the future of work, then I would rather make that change myself and lead that way. And that's really what led to The Outlier.
Well, and I want to share that here for folks tuning in. Please be sure to check out Yam's work, theoutlierpr.com, and then follow on Instagram, The Outlier PR. I have to think, so I've now known you now for several years, and I'm just thinking sort of back to the experience of navigating life as an international student at USD. It seems pretty natural to me that you went out to go start your own firm, especially for as many challenges as you probably face having to go back and forth between completely different cultures. I have to ask, as we sort of think about the topic we're addressing today, which is your perspective on mental health, having been very much a global citizen. What are your thoughts and sort of differences in approach to mental health in the cultures that you've lived in?
Okay, I'd like to address it from 2 parts, right? Essentially, I feel like mental health in India it's a topic that is picking up steam. I think more so led by a lot of corporates, because you understand that certain policies need to be standardized across, regions. And in general, the awareness at that level, right, to make people more comfortable with having those kind of conversations in safe spaces. If I backtrack to like my time in the US, right, I think awareness is a lot more in America in terms of mental health. I think people are more comfortable having those conversations, and I think there's more acceptance as well, right? So you're not to say that the resources are more or less in each country. I think the resources are always available, but it's about how comfortable the person is to access those resources and how reciprocative, the people you surround yourself with are to, accept that this is something that's going on in your life and know how to respond or react to it as well. So I think in that sense, in America, because that conversation has been happening for such a long time, people are more, they know how to react or respond. If somebody says, I don't feel good today, right? You realize, okay, what can I do? How can we approach this? Who do we need to speak to, right? How can we help get through this together? Versus here, it's a little hushed and kind of brushed under the table, saying, just sleep on it, you'll feel better tomorrow. And if you don't feel better tomorrow, then we'll take a call, right? So I think that sense of urgency and the gravity of the situation is a little hard to assess, because it's not something that, one, people are expressive about over here, and 2, they're not sure how people will respond or react to what they say. So it's a little different in that sense.
I appreciate you kind of pulling me back for a second and just, separating those 2 perspectives. I am curious, having lived now in both places, and I would generally say, especially having spent a really formative period in South Dakota, I would imagine you have a really great perspective to share on sort of, hey, this is how different it actually is. One thing I am curious about is, I don't know that the average viewer coming here today, and probably myself included, would know sort of the intricacies or nuances of what mental health looks like in India. Why do you think there is a difference?
In general, a lot of conversations we don't talk about openly, right? I think it's changing, and I think it's come a long way. That being said, I think there's a lot of room for growth over here. I'm going to take a very simple example in terms of menstrual health and well-being, right? That's also something that a lot of people don't talk about here. So it goes down to just, as a society, I think it's the way we've been raised as well. And it comes from generations and generations of what, you're surrounded by. I think today and in the workplace, right, a lot more people are very comfortable saying, I'm having a really bad day. I just need a mental day, right? And now companies are offering that, and they understand that you do need a mental day off. And earlier, even categorization of leaves was so different, right? So as a nation, just to give you some perspective, right, we get, on average, most people get around a minimum of 2 weeks to about 21 days of paid vacation. Okay. And that's paid time off. And that's apart from your 12 days of like sick leave. Okay. Over the past 2-3 years, things have evolved a lot with larger technology companies coming in, larger global companies coming in, where you now have 6 days of sick leave. You actually also have 6 days of casual leave. And for a casual leave, you don't really need a reason to take that leave, right? Then you have now companies incorporating mental health days, right? Well-being days. You have menstrual cycle days. So people are becoming more aware of you as an individual. You need to understand yourself, because we will never understand what you're going through, right? Somebody who may be able to react to a situation that is not, I would say that's important, but the way they react to it, maybe their scale is probably a 2, whereas somebody else might react to it as an 8. And you can't judge that from the outside. So they're saying, if you understand, what you're going through, you step forward and take that stance for yourself, right? Look out for yourself. And I think once that comes in, thought process change. But it's still not easy to take that back into a household, right? A traditional household, because it's just not a conversation people are used to having openly.
That's a fantastic point, especially just getting down to that. You're pulling at a cultural shift, of course, but also just thinking of sort of what is our lived experience coming from our parents and sort of the folks who walked before us, so to speak. I am curious, having now gone back and forth, what do you think the United States, I should say, we as South Dakotans, can learn from the way mental health is addressed or treated in India, and vice versa? Where do you see sort of the translation happening?
I think so. India is and most South Asian countries, what's unique to us is that sense of family and bonding, right? Regardless of what happens, you will always have your parents there to support you. You will always have, your several aunts, uncles, and your cousins, right? And we hold that extremely close. I know it's a very similar sense of bonding that happens in the Midwest, but it's not necessarily true for a majority of the US, and not at the scale that it is in the South Asian countries, right? And I think knowing that, right, when you have that support system, and depending on how large or small that is, that can make a huge difference in a person's life, right? But I think the fundamental of it is, regardless of, and this is something I feel people need to talk about or realize, is that regardless of how strong of a support system you have, unless you are ready to talk about it, unless you are ready to face it and accept it, or do something about it, nobody can do anything to help you. Because if you don't say anything, you can't read somebody's mind, right? So I don't think I quite answered your question. I'm sorry, but
I think you're definitely pulling at it, though, right? The idea, like, if we can't read another's mind, some of this, what you're getting at, I think, at least from what I'm hearing, is sort of this need for self-awareness and sort of how what is taught.
Yeah, I would say the one thing that both countries can learn from each other is, in India, you're surrounded by so many people, right? And so many people that care and want to do so much. Even if you don't want them to be around you, you're surrounded by them, right? And that's nice to have that support system. In the US, I think because you all are so spread apart, right, that it's important to understand that and have those check-ins and checkpoints with people, because you don't know, if you just don't hear from somebody, you see things on social media, which is, the worst thing that could happen to us nowadays, because everyone's life looks really fancy and fantastic, but you don't know what happened to them that morning or that evening, right? And
Right.
I think making sure that you have more checkpoints when you are spread apart like that is really important.
It's a really good point, especially, going to a place like Vermilion, especially in a state that's so, I wouldn't necessarily call Vermilion geographically isolated, but, the United States has many of those places that are. So I think it's an important point to hear for folks who are tuning in. So kind of turning a little bit back, I guess, to your path, getting your way to the University of South Dakota, the ticket that the average person might see is, you came for tennis, which obviously there's a lot more to what you did at USC than tennis. I am curious, in that transition you had to Vermilion, what was that like in terms of your experience, both just trying to navigate a new culture, but also just thinking through sort of what that meant for your own mental health and sort of things you might have done to support yourself in that transition?
I think because I came for tennis, I think that really helped, because then you're already put into this group of people, right, where you're constantly with them. You have to do X number of activities with them. You have to see them day in and day out, whether you like it or not. And that bonding, right, and that kind of a team sport really does bring you together. And we were also fortunate, I think, at the time, that everybody on the tennis team were international. I think barring one person who was from the US, right? And even she was technically of Russian heritage and a first generation American. So we understood each other. So we leaned on each other, right? And that sense of just knowing that you have somebody there for you who understands where you come from and what you're going through, I think that makes such a big difference, right? So it wasn't as hard as, I would think it would be if you don't come with that group, or you're not forced into that group. I know that universities do a lot in terms of, the buddy program, and there are, you can join, like, when you join in and you have your freshman orientation, you meet so many people. But I think culturally, it is really nice to be able to be with a group that understands that same culture or those same values and that value system that you were probably raised with. And then being able to then guide you or just be there for you. So
that's such I have to say, and I don't know that we always appreciate this. You mentioned, and I think just for clarification for somebody tuning in, yes, the entire USD tennis team at one moment in time came from outside of the United States. I think it's fascinating to share that. Do you think that had a lot, that sort of, I guess, globalized perspective, coming from all corners of the world. Do you think that made a big difference in terms of the team dynamics? I know you mentioned sort of the mutual connection, but even just in terms of how you competed or even how you navigated challenges, do you think that helped kind of having that shared experience?
Oh, that's a tricky one. Because I know we had a lot, at one point in time, we had like 3 or 4 team members from Serbia, right? And naturally, oftentimes you'll find that when people from the same country, or at least 2, 3 people from the same country are there, they switch to their native language, which is which is very natural, right? Now, I didn't understand that, because growing up in Bangalore, like, we speak English, everything over here is in English, right? And so when somebody asked me, Yamini, do you think in English? And I was like, yes, I do. Why would I not think in English, right? But when I came down to it and we asked the girls from Serbia, And they said, no, we think in Serbian, then we convert it into English, and then we tell you what we're saying, right? So it does take us a little while to comprehend. So when they were together, it was very natural for them to slip back into that, native language, because it's second nature, right? And you see these things like, where then that becomes, technically, it could be seen as a problem. But because all of us understand that, right? If I had somebody from India and they were comfortable speaking a certain language, I would automatically speak to them in that language out of respect, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's where that cultural aspect and awareness comes in, where you don't feel like, why are they talking in a different language? Are they saying something behind my back? You more empathize, saying that it's natural. And I think that is where, certain things come in, where you're also exposed to it. So there are things that work in your favor, but I think regardless of it, everyone understands where the other person is coming from.
That makes perfect sense. No, I appreciate you diving into that. And I can only imagine, trying to imagine dreaming or thinking in a different language and having to convert. I'd imagine the mental power it takes to do that. That's beyond my pay grade for sure.
Likewise. I mean, my roommate, Nina, so she did that all the time. And then I think 3-4 years later, because, everything's in English, you get used to it. And she said, now I dream in English too, and I think in English too. And I said, okay, but as soon as she goes back home, clicks.
There goes. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just natural.
Well, I have to ask one more question before we do a quick spotlight on your work. So no pressure on this one, of course. Yeah. So thinking of your time as a student at USD and the work that I know you did, and that many of us at USD knew you did to support international students, what would be your advice to an international student coming to the US, starting for the first time out, and trying to navigate not just a new culture, a new educational experience, but also their own mental health? What advice would you share with any international student coming to the US?
Okay. I think one piece of advice in general, not necessarily related to mental health, that I'd like to share is that don't expect people to come to you, right? I think it's about the two sides to every coin. So I think you need to go up to people as well and make that effort. I think oftentimes we say, oh, I'm new here, so, other people should probably be more receptive of me. But I don't think that's true, because oftentimes you'll find that people may not know how to react, right? It's not that they don't like you. It's not ignorance. It's just, honestly, they're not sure if they would say something that would offend you or not, right? So I think, so don't hesitate to, be the first one to go up and strike a conversation. And I think get as involved as possible, because you'd be surprised as to how many people really care and want to learn more about your culture or about you as an individual, right? And they genuinely want to care. That's one piece of general advice. In terms of mental health, I think, do find that I think the university, if you're coming for college, offers a lot of resources, right? You have your advisors, you have your international advisors, you have a lot of student organizations and groups as well, where they are focused on diversity and inclusion. So if you do feel left out, or if you feel like you're not fitting in, I think those are avenues that you should definitely explore, so that you do feel at home. Because when you feel at home, then people, you emanate those, this aura around you that says that I'm approachable, talk to me, I want a friend. And that kind of resonates with the other person. Otherwise, you'll always be kind of like this invisible barrier where people can tell that, okay, you're not so comfortable if I approach you. And I think once you break that down, it makes your life easier, and I think you'll be happier as well.
I love that perspective. Thanks for sharing that, Yam. And I know, especially when we think we're trying to get a message across and we may not know how to help somebody, I think it's important sometimes to remind ourselves that sometimes we have to do some of the reach out too, and sort of make that that work. So that was probably the hardest question I'll give you. Just kidding. I have another one for you later on, but we'll we'll throw it back to you. I do want to talk a little bit more about your work and kind of give folks a chance to learn more. So I'll put up the handle. Please follow Yamini's work with the Outline PR, her new PR firm. How did you get into this, Yam? How did you get into the idea of not just PR, but then obviously the challenges and struggles that come along with starting your own firm?
I think from day one, Eric, I came back home and I was like, okay, I want to go back to the US. I want to do this. I'm not sure if I want to work here. And my parents were always extremely supportive. They said, Yamini, why don't you just start something of your own? Thinking about it logically, though, it doesn't make sense to start something in a new country when you don't have the foundation set in place, right? Like you need to know your vendors, you need to know your suppliers, you need to know how operations work, right? In each country, it's very different. And then there's no point starting a business if you can't hire talent, and how will talent know about you unless you kind of build, yourself up in the industry as well. So public relations is kind of what I studied. I did my undergrad in, strategic communications. I had some great mentors and advisors. I think they really helped me understand the power of public relations. And then through the 5 years here in India, I think it just showed me what more could be done. Like really, truly, it's not just the power of public relations, but seeing that translate into actual business impact, right? It's so gratifying, right? And just really, really cool. Like I always say, I am fortunate to be in a field where I get to work directly with like the leadership. So directly with the C-suite team, you get a lot of the information beforehand, and you can pave the way for, the future in terms of how people receive that information, the impact it can have on society. And, I'm not creating that product, but I get to be a part of conveying that message to people. So I absolutely love my job. I wouldn't trade it for anything else. And taking that forward, I said, okay, what is my long-term career plan, right? Where do I see myself? And I know you always pushed me and encouraged me. You said, Yamini, you can do anything you set your mind to. So I think having that support system to push me as well and just believe that I could do it, and believe in me and make me believe in myself. I think sometimes that's also important. And knowing that, failure it's okay to fail, right? I think that's one of the biggest reasons people hesitate. You're like, okay, what if I fail? It's okay to fail. That means you tried. But if you didn't try, then you'll never know, right? And I just wanted to change some things in terms of like the way I would like to work. I didn't want to sit at my desk, for 12 hours a day, 5 days a week for the rest of my life. And in line with that, I felt like in this field, that's kind of what's required, but I feel like there's a way you can work around it. So I wanted to bring in a fresh perspective and just see if I could succeed on my own, because I always knew that if I didn't start something of my own, I would want to definitely run a large public relations firm. And then it got me thinking to say, just because you're good at your job doesn't mean you're good at running a business or helping it scale, right? If you're handed something successfully, you can very well sink it if you don't have the right skill sets. And I thought this was a right opportunity for me to kind of break off and test those skill sets out to see if I have it. And that's kind of what led to this new venture.
And first off, I have to say I'm flattered. I'm glad that my advice apparently stuck halfway across the world to go launch something, Yam. But more importantly, I want folks to know here on the show, tell us about the business. Tell us about the Outline PR.
Yeah, so the Outlier, essentially, it's really small. I mean, we honestly just launched May 1st, right? So it's really new, but We do have 2 clients on board. They're in the consumer space, which is really exciting. Both are startups themselves, both founded by female entrepreneurs, which is really exciting to be able to work with them. I think the startup space in general in India is fast growing. It's been around for a very long time. And I think it never ceases to amaze me in terms of the opportunities out there and how people are actually pursuing them. It's a very new field for me, but what we essentially do is help in very simple terms. If you have a business objective and you want to reach here, or whatever your objective is in 3 to 6 months or 1 year, we help align your communication strategy to meet those business goals, right? So if that means you want to build brand awareness amongst a specific target audience, we will help you do that. If you want to raise funds by investors in like 2 years, we help you do that. So really making sure that if you say this is what I want to reach, this is where I want to get in terms of your business, in terms of your product, whatever it is, we play that advisory role and also help execute the entire communication strategy piece.
Ambitious to say the least, as always. And I'm curious too. Are your clients just in India? Are they in the United States, global? Tell me a little bit more about kind of where you're looking to reach folks.
Yeah, right now, honestly, it's India. India is a huge market, I think, and we do work with global companies as well. In my previous company, I worked with 4 out of my 5 clients were global clients, all very large MNCs in the technology space. So, the opportunity is there, but the idea is that you do cater to your market and your region because you understand the nuances in this market that another region may not. So we work closely with, China, we work closely with APAC, EMEA, which is Europe, and the US as well. But you do focus specifically on your market in collaboration with other markets.
That's awesome. I know, sort of thinking in terms of global scale, especially when it comes to marketing PR, it seems like our barriers to reaching one another are more and more being thrown out by platforms like Instagram, Facebook, so on. So I have to, give one more shout out, of course, to your Instagram page. Please follow folks who are tuning in. One thing I had to ask, and I know I've got some rapid fire for you to share before we close up shop. I know when we talk about global mental health right now, we can't really not talk about the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and what's going on for every country that's being sort of, I haven't gone through the struggles of the pandemic. And I know it's obviously a topic of interest right now in the US. Tell us a little bit about what you're experiencing in India right now and sort of how that's playing out in terms of mental health, if you're noticing anything.
Yeah, I think it's a very important conversation to have right now, right? I think the second wave for us has been really, really terrible. And I would say we're not even halfway through it, which is kind of sad and really scary. I think just as a nation, right, the fact that it's spread so quickly, so fast, and it's really impacting a lot of lives. It's a very uncertain, I think you never know what's going to happen tomorrow, that's for sure. In terms of mental health, I think it's taking a huge toll on people, right? And this goes like there are multiple aspects to this, right? One is 50% of the people, all companies are working at 50% capacity, right? Because the other half of the workforce is either they themselves are COVID positive, they're taking care of a family member who's COVID positive, they're dealing with a loss, right? Or trying to get medical support. So in that sense, mentally, they're not available to be able to, help out. Sorry, I don't want to, my laptop's dying. I don't want to. There we go. Sorry. Okay. So it is really, really tough, right? So half your workforce is out of action. The other half are working extremely long hours. They're getting burnt out. You also have to understand that, I am very fortunate. I come from a very good family. I have a nice house where I have enough space to walk around. I'm not confined to a room. That's not the case for most people in India, right? A lot of people have moved out of their homes to bigger cities, right? So they have to pay rent. It's not cheap, right? So there's 2-3 people in one in a really small space, right? And you're confined to that space because we're going through a lockdown right now of 45 days to 60 days. We don't know when it's going to end, right? And we have to do this in order to, really protect ourselves. And also, just unfortunately, that's the way the virus is right now. All of those aspects take a huge toll on somebody's mental health, right? Just imagine just being imprisoned in a room where you can't go out, you can't walk around, you have no exercise, you have no personal space, right? And it's not like America where you can step out, there's enough open air, there are enough parks so you can walk around, right? Right now we're in a strict lockdown. And when the government says lockdown, everyone does abide by it, right? Or should abide by it. So it's tough. It's really tough. I think people are doing everything in their capacity to help, right? In terms of giving them resources and all of that. But I think the trauma, just the sheer amount of trauma that, families are seeing, our medical healthcare workers are seeing, the government, the police are seeing, right? Just it's going to take a lot to deal with it. I don't think it's going to be easy, and I think it's going to scar a lot of people. Look at children, they don't even understand what it means to stay at home. They say, "Why? What did I do wrong?" Right? or even aspects education now completely being online, right from kindergarten, right, where they have to sit online. I think all of those things are going to change the way people work, the way they communicate. It's an interesting time. I don't know. 5 years from now, we'll have to have another chat and see.
Then we probably will.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think sometimes, even here in the U.S., obviously with news today coming from the CDC that folks who are vaccinated are able to start reducing their mask usage and things. I think it's interesting for us to sort of think through what it's like to have now been navigating the pandemic, but now coming out of it, sort of what things will present. So I appreciate you digging into that with me. I have to do some quick rapid fire questions, keep things moving quickly, and then one last question before we close up shop. So
Sure.
I have to ask, so you're obviously from my end, I know that you're probably one of the most famous tennis players that I know personally, but what sport do you love to watch besides tennis?
Is it terrible that I'm going to say, okay, no, actually Formula One, I would say, is one of my go-to sports to watch. I really enjoy watching F1.
Love it. What was my second question going to be? What are you reading right now?
Ooh. So I did pick up a couple of, those leadership books and, those training guides and things that are supposed to be really, really impactful in terms of running a business. But honestly, my go-to default has always been fiction fantasy. There's a fantastic one by Elizabeth Arden. It's a trilogy based on fiction fantasy again, Russia and back their tales, essentially their fairy tales. So that's kind of what I'm reading right now, the third book.
Well, I think we had a rapid fire question just thrown into here from Brian Shute.
Hey, Brian.
When are you coming back to visit the USD fam?
Hopefully this year, if all goes well. Hopefully September, October is when I would love to visit, just in time for D-Days, if I think it's around that time, but we'll see. But yeah, I think, I haven't spoken to Brian in so long. It's so nice to see a message.
Another rapid fire for you. So obviously we've had to all sort of navigate lockdowns at this point. What is the boredom buster? What's the thing that you're doing to kind of navigate a lockdown right now?
Netflix.
Netflix.
Honestly, it's so bad. I'm trying to do like this online yoga class as well. So like something that helps me move a little bit, right? Because I feel like I just sit otherwise on the chair or on the couch for extended periods of time, which is terrible for you. And so just something that helps with movement as well. And just cleaning the house takes a lot.
Gotta love that deep clean.
Yeah, and over here it's not like once a week because of the amount of like, dust and in general. So it's like every day.
Last rapid fire for you. What's one song somebody should listen to right now?
I've thought about this. I would say "Scars to Your Beautiful" by Alicia Cara. That's kind of one of my go-to ones. It's like when I'm having I just need to be pumped up in terms of believing in myself. That's kind of my go-to song for sure.
All right. Well, we'll add that one to the list for folks who've been watching us for the past 6 months here. So we've been gathering songs for a playlist that'll get launched in 2021. So end of 2021 recovery playlist coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic.
That's so cool.
Last question for you for the day. What's one thing you've learned in your life that you wish other people understood?
Oh, that's a tough one. Don't give up on yourself. I think that oftentimes, we always hope that somebody else cares and steps up and pulls us out of a rut, which it is nice to have that support. But I think if you don't believe in yourself and you don't vouch for yourself, who will, right? Because you kind of emanate that same attitude, that belief, and yeah. So I think just believe in yourself, vouch for yourself, and always stick to your gut. I think that's your gut will always tell you if you're doing something right or wrong. It's not proven me wrong till date.
Strong theme from a strong woman, I must say. Appreciate you being here, Yam. Thanks for joining the show. Is there anything else before we sign off for the day that you want to share? Any final comments?
No, I have a question for you, Eric.
Okay, and I don't think I've got a question on the show in a while.
Question master. How do you deal with everything? I mean, I know you handle this, you handle multiple things. You're extremely passionate about doing so much for society, right? I don't know how many people know what all you did in terms of your masters, completing 2 in like a much shorter span time than anticipated. And, obviously, even in college, undergrad, you did so much. So how do you balance everything?
I think there's a self-awareness of knowing what, for me anyway, is the driving force. And so as long as I have connection to sort of what that driving force is, I can kind of tap into that at any moment in time and say, that's going to kind of help me carry through. And I guess the driving force for me has always been family. It's always been sort of a connection back to the places that I've known and the people that I care about. And so between that and always having sort of the mantra of there's only so much you can control, and not praying for a lighter load, but a stronger back. That seems to be a common theme for me throughout my life. And I think for folks out there who you've heard me sort of throwing the questions out at all of our guests. If you're wondering where the host is at, the host says connection to family, connection to sort of those roots and that passion of the sacrifices they've made, and understanding what those meant for me has really been what drives me to sort of keep it all held together, so to speak. And
just having really great friends across the world. Also
that too. Mostly that.
I'm kidding.
Well, thank you for being here, Yam. I know doing
No,
this across such a crazy time difference is a lot of sacrifice. So I appreciate you making that work for us. It was really, really
no,
great to have
my
you here.
pleasure. I think that what you guys doing at Lost and Found and Voices of Resilience is extremely important. And thank you so much for having me.
No, I'm glad to have you, Yam. Thanks for joining us. So, folks, it ends another week of Voices of Resilience. And again, when it comes to the month of May, we really can't highlight enough the fact that May is Mental Health Month. So, what I encourage you to do today, Lost and Found came out with a comprehensive guide called Let's Talk About Mental Health. You can go to our website, resilienttoday.org, and look under the tab for resources and programs to find the guide. It's a simple form, fill it out, and you'll be directed to a page that has the guide and a series of video content we've created to help you make the most of the guide. The guide itself is about 35 pages, so what I would say is don't let it intimidate you. Simply look at it as a set of tools to help you answer some common questions. What is mental health? What isn't mental health? How is it connected to things like suicide and suicide prevention? How do I seek help for myself? How do I provide help to others? Please go to our website and download that. And I encourage you this month of May, to consider the conversations you have about mental health with yourself and with others. So that ends another episode. We're really thankful to have Yam with us here this week. Next week, we'll have another guest joining us here from the Community Outreach Center here in Sioux Falls to talk about how we think about mental health, homelessness, and supporting those who need the most in our community. So, folks, thanks again for joining us this week. Really appreciate you being here with us. And I hope that, as always, you're walking away from today feeling just a little bit more resilient. So take care, everybody.
We are compassionate.
We are inclusive.
We are responsive.
And we are here.